All right, time now for us to break the huddle, presented by the original Saltworks. DJ, a lot to get into from last week. Let's start in Midtown Atlanta, where the Mack Brown Tar Heels fall again, a 46-42 loss for Carolina. Man, the defense, probably the understatement of the day, defense, a real question mark for Mack Brown's team.
Yeah, the details here, Chris, are what makes it a killer for what UNC football is trying to accomplish this season. The Tar Heels led the game 35-24 entering the fourth quarter. Drake May and that UNC offense, which had been largely blamed and probably fairly so for the loss to Virginia, got to score more than 27 against a lowly UVA team, and they failed to do that. The offense did its job this time, putting up 42 points ultimately in Atlanta. But Georgia Tech then, trailing 35-24, puts together a 9-play, 88-yard touchdown drive on which the Yellow Jackets threw the ball one time. Then, after Carolina scores another touchdown, credit to Drake May and the Heels again, the Jackets have a 2-play, 75-yard touchdown drive consisting of 2 running plays. There's a backup running back named Dante Smith at Georgia Tech that, beyond the Georgia Tech university community and Dante's family, nobody knew who he existed. He had barely played in recent weeks, and he has a career game against the Tar Heels, including a 70-yard touchdown run, the game of his life. Finally, Tech has another 6-play, 79-yard TD drive. That one was a little more balanced between run and pass, and that became the game winner when Tez Walker fumbled the ball away after a reception on the Tar Heels' final drive. The questions moving forward here, some are obvious, but some maybe not. What happened to the Carolina defense, Chris, that we watched dominate South Carolina in Charlotte, dominate Minnesota at Kenan Stadium, dominate Pitt on the road, dominated Syracuse in a 40-something-7 game, right? Did Gene Chizik go into the prevent nickel defense too early against Georgia Tech, daring them to run the ball early in the fourth quarter in a way that came back to haunt the Heels? Are the Carolina defenders wearing down here at midseason, right? You don't have as many snaps on your body against South Carolina in those earlier games. Are they wearing down because the Heels don't play their backups often enough? Are their backups no good? And maybe one more thing to add to that, keep in mind that Carolina, which does not have a dominant offensive line, has a functional offensive line. You know why they do? Because they signed a center from the University of Miami, a right guard from Coastal Carolina University, and a right tackle out of the Ivy League. Major college transfers, 3 of the 5 starting offensive linemen. Did Mack Brown and Gene Chizik look at his defense, at their defensive line, where Kamen Rucker at one end is an all-ACC player, no doubt about it? The other 3 guys starting and their backups are giving virtually nothing to the Tar Heels this season, especially against UVA, which ran the ball well after running it well against nobody else. Remember, the Cavs hadn't beaten another FBS team. They beat the Tar Heels largely through the running game and keeping Drake May off the field. Georgia Tech ultimately did something similar, and it's in large part because 3 of the 4 defensive line positions are giving the Heels next to nothing. Did they ignore the transfer portal there? Did they misevaluate their own talent? Are those guys not conditioned well enough to perform in the fourth quarter? Because against Virginia and Georgia Tech, the Heels did not look like the better conditioned team. Again, it starts with personnel. Any team not dominating at the line of scrimmage is going to be vulnerable to an upset. We've been saying about that about the Heels even through their 6-0 start. It's now come back to bite them twice in back-to-back weeks. And I think that defensive line and those sub-issues beyond it are fundamental to what Mack Brown has to ask himself right now.
We'll talk more about the Tar Heels coming up a little bit later on. Let's move on to our next game. Duke falling at Louisville 23-0. The Blue Devils a little banged up and kind of looked like it on Saturday.
Yeah, and Mike Elko's 2 seasons as the head coach of the Blue Devils, his team has only lost 2 games by double digits, and they're the last 2 at Florida State and then at Louisville. In Tallahassee, I think you could give the Devils the benefit of the doubt, right? This is an undefeated FSU team. They might end up in the college football playoff. And the Devils led the Seminoles in the fourth quarter before giving up 21 points late and losing that 38-20 game in Tallahassee, losing Riley Leonard to another ankle injury in the process. At Louisville, the Devils fell behind 14-0 in the first quarter. And I would argue for the first time in 2 years under Mike Elko, they just never looked dangerous enough offensively to make it a ball game. Look at their losses last year. Remember, they won 9 games, one of the best totals in Duke football history. They only lost 4, and they were all close games. Louisville was not close even beyond the 23-0 score that you mentioned. Credit to Louisville, which plays the second best scoring defense in the entire ACC. They're giving up only about 18 points per game. Duke's defense continues to be mostly good. But offensively, they can't throw the ball at all. They're worst in the ACC in passing offense all season, which is a little bit weird when Riley Leonard, a talented guy, is your quarterback. But they also, after running the ball fairly well most of the season, they couldn't run it against Louisville either. I think, again, some of this is credit to Louisville, which is rising in the national top 25 and might end up being Florida State's opponent in the ACC title game. But I think Duke has to look within as well, because at this stage of the season, Riley Leonard has only 3 touchdown passes for the whole year. He's only completing 57% of his passes. No level of coaching greatness is going to overcome that kind of one-dimensional offense in the year 2023. Everybody knows how much we all respect the job Mike Elko has done, but that loss to Louisville was really a cold splash of water on an otherwise impressive Duke season.
And the Blue Devils have a short week. We'll talk more about that coming up in our third segment as well. The final game we're going to recap from last week, the big home win for NC State over Clemson, 24-17. State coming off that bye win. A bye week gets the win. Clemson back to the drawing board, and the Wolfpack gets the win. And the Textile Bowl gets to keep the trophy for another year.
Yeah, I was most impressed by the fact that Dave Doeren got a win in a game that I would argue he had fewer chess pieces. And what I mean is, this is not a vintage team at Clemson. We all know that. But they have 2 really good running backs. They have a couple of really talented wide receivers. They have a good tight end. And they have probably 6 or 7 guys on that starting defense that are going to end up playing in the NFL. The Wolfpack has some great pieces. I mean, Peyton Wilson at linebacker is one of the best players in the ACC at any position. But Dave Doeren ends up tying the legend Earl Edwards as the winningest coach in NC State history in a game where arguably he had to pull the levers in a smarter way than Dabo Swinney did. And he did. And he did it in part by not asking too much of MJ Morris, right? Both teams have young quarterbacks who aren't very experienced and make a lot of mistakes. Cade Klubnik threw a couple of interceptions. MJ Morris was probably told, dude, let's lean on our defense, play the field position game, don't turn the ball over, and that's our best chance to win. Well, MJ Morris didn't have pretty numbers, but he followed that directive, and it did lead to a win in part because Peyton Wilson, a legend in the making at NC State, did have exactly what we literally asked him on our podcast last week, Chris. How about Peyton? Scoring on defense is what you're going to need. Well, guess what? Peyton Wilson gets a pick-6 touchdown, and the Wolfpack wins by 7. I mean, I wish we could have an on-demand button for lots of things in life the way we did there. But even beyond that, I thought it was brilliant for a Wolfpack offense that just doesn't have a lot of desirable puzzle pieces. They all know, everybody knows KC Concepcion is the one truly unique talent on that side of the ball for the Pack. He's a wide receiver, right? That complicates how much you can get him the ball, especially with a young quarterback. Well, they got it to him 5 times with passes, and he scored 2 TDs while catching almost 100 yards worth of passes. But they also very creatively got their wide receiver, freshman KC Concepcion, the ball 2 additional times on running plays. Credit to Robert Anai, the OC, credit to Dave Doeren, and of course, credit to Concepcion. He took one of those 2 running plays 50 yards and set up another score. So really good day all around for Dave Doeren. Now 1 win away from becoming the winningest coach in Wolfpack football history. He earned it against a talented Clemson team that has its warts, but the Wolfpack had to expose those warts, and they did in front of the faithful at Carter Finley.